art galleries weren't really my thing. Too quiet, too pretentious, and honestly, too boring. But my buddy James, who fancied himself a connoisseur, insisted I tag along to some exclusive exhibit downtown. "It's a big deal, Leo," he said, practically dragging me through the gallery doors. "The artist is brilliant. His name's Gabriel, and his work is the talk of the city." I followed him in, hands in my pockets, half listening as James rambled about brushstrokes and emotional depth. I was seconds away from slipping out to find coffee when I saw it. Her. My legs stopped moving, and my breath hitched in my throat. There, hanging on the pristine white wall, was a painting of my wife, Amelie. She was unmistakable, her delicate features, the curve of her neck, the small birthmark on her collarbone I knew better than my own reflection. But that wasn't what made my stomach churn. It was how she was painted. Amelie was nude, draped in soft light, her eyes gazing at the viewer with a mixture of allure and vulnerability. Her lips curled in a faint, knowing smile. It was intimate, raw, and unmistakably personal. "Leo, you okay?" James asked, snapping me out of my daze. "Yeah," I managed to say, though my voice came out hollow. "Who's the model for this one?" "Oh, that's his muse," James said, lowering his voice as if sharing a juicy secret. "Gabriel never paints anyone unless they're special to him. The plaque says it's inspired by someone he calls Ga. Wonder who she is." My mind raced. Ga. Gabriel and Amelie. Could it be? I moved closer to the painting, my eyes scanning every detail, searching for some mistake, some sign that I was imagining things. But no. The evidence was clear. As I stood there, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. How long had this been going on? How had I missed it? And most importantly, who the hell was Gabriel to think he could immortalize my wife like this? James kept talking, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. "It's gorgeous, isn't it? Gabriel's got this way of capturing emotion. Makes you wonder what kind of connection he must have had with her to pull this off." I nodded numbly, unable to form a coherent response. My pulse pounded in my ears, and my vision blurred slightly as the rage started to bubble up. I had to leave. "Hey, man," I said, interrupting James' mid-monologue. "I just remembered I've got something to take care of. I'll catch you later." James looked puzzled but didn't push. "You sure? We just got here." "Yeah, I'm sure." I turned on my heel and walked out of the gallery, the image of Amelie's painted form burned into my mind. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a declaration. And if Gabriel thought he could play games with me, he was about to learn that I wasn't a pawn. As I stepped into the cold evening air, one thought consumed me: I need to find out the truth. I didn't go home right away after leaving the gallery. My mind was a hurricane, and I needed answers before I faced Amelie. Wandering the streets, I replayed the scene over and over, her face on that canvas, her body exposed to the world, and Gabriel's audacity to call her his muse. By the time I reached home, I had a plan. It was simple: act normal, wait for the right moment, and dig until I uncovered the truth. That evening, Amelie was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner. She greeted me with her usual warm smile. "Hey, you're home early. How was your day?" "Uneventful," I lied, shrugging off my coat. "How about you?" "Oh, just work and errands," she said, her voice casual. I watched her closely, looking for any flicker of guilt, any sign that she suspected I knew something. But Amelie was calm, too calm. Later that night, as she showered, I made my move. Her laptop sat open on the dining table. Amelie was never one for strong passwords, her birthday was an easy guess. I logged in and opened her messaging app. My stomach churned as I scrolled through the usual conversations with friends and colleagues. Then I found it. Gabriel. The chat history was long, filled with playful banter, compliments, and inside jokes. My heart pounded as I read further. The messages weren't just flirtatious, they were intimate. "Your skin is like silk under my fingers. I wish I could paint you every day. you're my greatest inspiration. I still remember how your laughter filled the studio that night. Each line hit me like a punch to the gut. And then I saw the photos. They weren't explicit, but they didn't need to be. Amelie, smiling coyly in his studio, surrounded by unfinished canvases. A close-up of her hand resting on his shoulder, his face blurred in the background. The final straw was a voice message. Gabriel's voice, smooth and dripping with arrogance. I've started the new painting. It's going to be my masterpiece, just like you. Can't wait for you to see it, my muse. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands trembling. When Amelie came out of the shower, I was already in bed, feigning sleep. She kissed my cheek and whispered, "Good night, love." I didn't respond. The truth was out, and it was uglier than I could have imagined. Amelie hadn't just betrayed me, she'd woven herself into someone else's world, leaving me in the dark. But now I knew. And if Gabriel thought he could claim my wife, he was about to learn that I played to win. Lying there in the dark, I began to formulate my next move. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Knowing the truth wasn't enough, I needed a plan. A calculated, methodical way to expose Amelie and Gabriel for what they were. But I couldn't do it impulsively. I had to outthink them both, using their own arrogance against them. The idea came to me as I stared at the painting in the gallery. Gabriel prided himself on his artistry, his ability to capture emotion. So, what better way to play into his ego than to commission him for his next masterpiece? The first step was creating a persona. I became Mr. Alexander, a wealthy art collector with a penchant for exclusivity. Using a disposable email address and a fabricated backstory, I contacted Gabriel under the guise of a potential client. "Your work has captivated me," I wrote. "I'm looking for something unique, an allegorical piece that explores themes of loyalty and betrayal. Something deeply personal, but not overt. Are you up for the challenge?" Gabriel responded within hours, eager and full of compliments about my taste and vision. He was hooked. As we corresponded, I guided him toward the concept I had in mind. "I want a piece that speaks to duality," I explained. "Imagine a woman standing between two bridges. One bridge is bright and golden, strong and sturdy. The other is dark, cracked, and ready to collapse. She's torn, hesitant, unsure which path to take." "That's a fascinating metaphor," Gabriel replied. "The emotional depth in such a composition would be remarkable." I added more details, subtly weaving elements that would connect the painting to Amelie and their affair. "Make sure her expression reflects guilt and indecision," I wrote. "In the dark bridge, add faint footprints, as if someone has already walked it before." Gabriel, too absorbed in his own artistic pride, didn't question the specifics. The weeks that followed were a careful dance. Gabriel sent me progress updates, sketches, color studies, and even musings about the universal nature of betrayal. I responded with enthusiastic praise, masking the growing satisfaction of my trap taking shape. Meanwhile, I played my part at home, acting as if nothing had changed. Amelie remained oblivious, though her occasional late nights and urgent errands continued. Each time she left, I smiled inwardly, knowing that every step she took toward Gabriel brought her closer to the reckoning I was preparing. Finally, the painting was finished. Gabriel was ecstatic. "It's one of my best works," he wrote. "I can't wait to unveil it for you." "Oh, don't worry," I replied. "You'll have your audience." With everything in place, it was time to set the stage. This wouldn't just be an unveiling, it would be a spectacle. The day of the dinner arrived. I played my part flawlessly, hosting with a calm demeanor that masked the storm brewing beneath the surface. Amelie flitted around the house, charming our friends and family as she always did. She looked radiant, but all I could see was the deceit behind her smile. Gabriel arrived late, carrying the covered painting with an air of dramatic importance. He greeted me with the confidence of a man who believed he owned the room. Amelie's eyes lit up when she saw him, though she quickly masked it with a polite nod. "Mr. Alexander," Gabriel said, shaking my hand firmly. "I think you're going to love this piece. "Oh, I'm sure I will," I replied, suppressing a smirk. "It's already become quite meaningful to me." Amelie shot me a curious glance but said nothing. As the evening progressed, Gabriel reveled in the attention, entertaining the guests with stories of his artistic process. Amelie, seated near him, laughed a little too freely at his jokes. Meanwhile, I circulated the room, ensuring everyone was comfortable, their glasses full. Finally, after dessert, I called for everyone's attention. "Friends," I began, raising my glass, "tonight is special not only because we're gathered together but because we have the privilege of unveiling a masterpiece by the incredible Gabriel." Polite applause filled the room as Gabriel stood, feigning modesty. "This piece," I continued, "is deeply personal to me. It explores themes of loyalty, trust, and the choices we make in our relationships. Gabriel, would you do the honors?" With a flourish, Gabriel pulled the cloth from the painting. The room fell silent. There she was, Amelie, unmistakably the woman in the painting. She stood between two bridges, one golden and strong, the other dark and crumbling. Her expression was a perfect blend of guilt and hesitation. The details were haunting, the faint footprints on the dark bridge, the way the shadows seemed to pull her toward it. Amelie's face turned as pale as the canvas behind her. Gabriel, still basking in the moment, hadn't noticed her reaction. "It's breathtaking," one of the guests murmured. "It's so intimate," another added, looking between the painting and Amelie. I stepped forward, my tone calm but deliberate. "Gabriel, your ability to capture the truth is astounding. This piece feels almost biographical, wouldn't you agree?" Gabriel froze, his self-assured smile faltering. He glanced at Amelie, whose wide eyes darted between the painting and me. "Leo, she began, but I raised a hand to silence her. "No need to explain, my dear," I said, my voice laced with icy politeness. "The painting says it all. Don't you think?" Gabriel finally grasped the situation. His face reddened, and he stammered, I didn't realize." "Oh, don't be modest," I interrupted. "Your work is so honest, so revealing. It's almost as if you've lived this moment yourself." The room, once filled with warmth and laughter, now felt cold and suffocating. Guests exchanged confused glances, unsure whether to intervene or remain silent. Amelie stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Leo, this is ridiculous," she said, her voice shaking. "Ridiculous?" I repeated, tilting my head. "What's ridiculous is thinking you could hide this forever." Turning to the guests, I smiled thinly. "Ladies and gentlemen, let's give Gabriel and Amelie a round of applause for their inspiring collaboration." No one clapped. Gabriel muttered an excuse and hurriedly left, the painting still on display for everyone to see. Amelie, her composure shattered, followed him out, leaving the room in stunned silence. I took a sip of my drink and raised my glass once more. "To loyalty," I said, the irony heavy in my voice. The guests, still reeling, mumbled awkward toasts before quickly making their exits. The stage had been set, the play performed, and the curtain closed. But the final act was still to come. By the time the last guest left, the house was eerily silent. The once vibrant rooms, filled with chatter and laughter, now felt hollow. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat by the fireplace, letting the events of the evening sink in. Amelie hadn't returned. Neither had Gabriel. I wasn't surprised. They'd both made their choices, and tonight, I'd made mine. The next morning, my phone buzzed incessantly with messages. Friends, family, and even a few acquaintances were all eager to weigh in on the spectacle. "Leo, what the hell happened last night? Is it true about Amelie and that artist? Man, that was brutal, but, wow." I ignored most of them, except for a text from my brother. "You played that perfectly. Want to grab a beer later?" My treat. Amelie returned home late that afternoon, her face pale and drawn. She hesitated in the doorway, her usual confidence replaced by something I hadn't seen in years, uncertainty. "Leo," she started, her voice soft, almost pleading. I didn't look up from the book I was reading. Back so soon? I figured you'd be with Gabriel, planning your next masterpiece. Please, she said, stepping closer. Can we talk? I closed the book and set it aside, finally meeting her gaze. Talk? Sure. Let's talk about how you turned our marriage into a game. Or maybe about how you thought I'd never find out. Her eyes filled with tears, but I felt no sympathy. I made a mistake, she whispered. I was stupid and selfish. But it didn't mean anything. You have to believe me. Didn't mean anything? I repeated, letting out a bitter laugh. You posed for him, Amelie. You let him paint you, share you with the world, and call you his muse. Tell me, how does nothing end up on a gallery wall? She had no response. Leo, I love you, she said desperately. I want to fix this. I'll do anything. Anything? I asked, standing up and walking toward her. She nodded, hope flickering in her eyes. Then pack your things, I said, my tone cold and final. Because this is over. Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I thought she might argue. But instead, she nodded silently and turned to leave. Amelie moved out that evening, taking only what she could fit in her car. I didn't offer to help. Gabriel, from what I heard, had retreated into obscurity, his reputation tarnished by the scandal. Apparently, his clients weren't keen on commissioning works from someone with a penchant for muses who happened to be married. As for me, life moved forward. A week later, I held a small gathering with close friends and family. It wasn't to dwell on the past, but to celebrate the freedom I'd gained. Standing before them, I raised a glass. To lessons learned and bridges burned. Here's to moving on. The room erupted in cheers, and for the first time in months, I felt truly alive. That night, as I sat on the balcony of my now quiet home, the stars above seemed brighter, clearer. I sipped my drink, the memory of Amelie and Gabriel now nothing more than a faint shadow in my mind. Checkmate, I murmured to myself, letting the cool night air wash over me. The game was over, and I had won. The weeks after Amelie's departure were surprisingly peaceful. The house, once filled with tension and lies, now felt like my own. I had purged every reminder of her and Gabriel, their betrayal no longer a weight on my shoulders but a stepping stone toward something better. One morning, while clearing out the guest room, I found the painting Gabriel had left behind. It was leaning against the wall, wrapped in protective fabric. For a moment, I considered destroying it, burning it in some symbolic act of closure. But then I laughed. Why should I waste my time on theatrics? Instead, I took the painting to a local auction house. Gabriel's name, despite the scandal, still carried weight in the art world. The painting sold for a small fortune. Ironically, it was Amelie's betrayal that helped fund my next adventure. With the money from the painting, I decided to travel. For years, I had been too tied down by work and the routines of married life to explore the world. Now, nothing was holding me back. I visited cities I had only read about, stood beneath the Eiffel Tower, walked the cobbled streets of Prague, and swam in the crystal-clear waters of the Amalfi coast. With each step, I felt lighter, freer, as though I was rediscovering who I was. In Florence, I wandered into a small gallery tucked away in a quiet alley. The art was different here, raw, emotional, and honest. One painting caught my eye, a woman standing at the edge of a cliff, staring out at a vast, open sky. Beautiful, isn't it? A voice said behind me. I turned to see a woman about my age, her dark hair tied back, a paintbrush tucked behind her ear. Stunning, I replied. She smiled. I'm the artist. My name's Elena. We talked for hours, about art, life, and the journeys that had brought us to that moment. She was nothing like Amelie, grounded, kind, and refreshingly sincere. Back home, I began to rebuild my life with a newfound sense of purpose. I took up painting as a hobby, not because I wanted to emulate Gabriel, but because I wanted to express myself in a way I never had before. Friends and family noticed the change in me. My brother joked that I seemed like a man who finally found the cheat codes to life. And maybe he was right. One evening, months after the dinner that changed everything, I sat on my balcony, sipping a glass of wine. The stars above were as clear as ever, and the air was filled with the hum of possibility. I thought about Amelie and Gabriel, not with anger or bitterness, but with detachment. They were chapters in a book I had already closed. Lifting my glass, I toasted the quiet night. To freedom, to lessons, and to always staying one step ahead. The game was over. The board was clear. And for the first time in years, I was ready to play on my own terms. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I realized that the best victories aren't always about defeating others. Sometimes, they're about finding the strength to walk away, rebuild, and thrive. And in this game of life, I was finally the king of my own board. Checkmate. Subscribe to never miss a new story and discover even more captivating tales.